Chapter 23, Part 3 of J.S. Bach, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. J.S. Bach, Volume 2 by Albert Schweitzer, translated by Ernest Neumann. The musical language of the cantatas, continued. The rhythms of felicity. Motifs constructed on the rhythm express both in the cantatas and the chorales the feeling of charm and happiness. In the cantata Erschallet ihr Lieder, number 172, the duet, quote, Komm, lass mich nicht länger warten, komm, du sanfter Himmelswind. Come, thou gentle breeze from heaven, keep me not waiting longer, end quote, is accompanied by the following progression in the bass. This rhythm, however, for the most part, does not appear in its pure form, but in sundry variants. In the accompaniment to the aria, quote, Sei getreu, nach dem Regen blüht der Segen. Be faithful, after the rain will come the blessing. End quote. In the cantata Weinen, Klagen, number 12, it assumes the following shape. It is suggested also in the duet, quote, Beruft Gott selbst, so muss der Segen auf allem unseren Tun im Übermaße ruhen. Call upon God himself, and blessing will rest in abundance upon all our doings. End quote. In the cantata, Siehe, ich will viel Fischer aussenden, number 88. In the cantata Auf Christi Himmelfahrt allein, number 128, it appears in combination with the joy motif. It sometimes receives further animation from the addition of semiquaver runs when it takes the form in which we meet with it, for example, in the cantata Lobe den Herrn meine Seele, number 143. Even in the accompaniment figure of the recitative, quote, Ach, Herr Gott, durch die Treue dein, wird unser Land in Fried und Ruhe sein. Ah, Lord God, by thy faithfulness our land shall find peace and quiet. End quote. In the cantata Nimm von uns, Herr, du treuer Gott, number 101, we may detect the essential movement of the felicity rhythm. It is recognizable again in the music to the words, quote, Ein heiligtes Gemüte sieht und schmecket Gottes Güte. A sanctified soul sees and tastes the goodness of the Lord, end quote. In the cantata Erhüttes Fleisch und Blut, number 173. Another motif of felicity is prompted by the idea of quiet, gently flowing waves. In a recitative in the cantata Ihr Menschen, rühmet Gottes Liebe, number 167, the following accompaniment appears in the bass at the words, quote, Mit Gnad und Liebe zu erfreuen, to rejoice with the grace and love of God. The recitative in the Trauerrode that speaks of the happy death of the princess has the following bass to it. Compare with this the accompaniment to the aria, quote, Vergib, O Vater, vergib unsere Schuld. Forgive, O Father, forgive our sin, end quote. in the cantata Bisher habt ihr nichts gebeten, number 87. The theme of the aria, quote, Sanfte soll mein Todeskümmer, my death shall be sweet, end quote, in the Easter oratorio runs thus. In the middle section of the first chorus of the cantata, Es ist nichts Gesundes an meinem Leibe, number 25, the motif of calmly moving water is used to express the words peace. In all these cases, the motion of the waves is meant to convey a spiritual symbolism, as is seen when we compare with them the bass accompaniment to the recitative, quote, Die stille Pleiße spielt mit ihren kleinen Wellen. The tranquil Pleiße plays with its little waves, end quote, in the secular cantata Auf schmetternde Töne. Bach expresses a warmer tinge of peaceful joy by a motif in this rhythm, usually in 12/8 and 9/8, but occasionally also in 6/8 and 3/4 time. Rhythms of this kind are not often met with in other composers. Bach, however, is very fond of them, forming out of them the loveliest and most flexible of his great phrases. The affinity of these themes with the angel motifs is obvious. Both are meant to represent graceful motion of an almost superterrestrial kind, by means of which Bach wishes to express the transfigured joy that has vanquished grief. One of the finest themes of this order is that of the aria, quote, Ich will leiden, ich will schweigen, I will suffer, I will be silent, end quote, in the cantata Bisher habt ihr nichts gebeten, number 87. We may cite also the theme of the aria, quote, Gedenk an uns mit deiner Liebe, schleus uns in dein Erbarmen ein. Think of us with thy love and enfold us in thy pity, end quote, in the cantata Wir danken dir, Gott, number 29. In the first chorus of the cantata, Also hat Gott die Welt geliebt, number 68, a similar theme expresses the idea of the eternal compassionate love of God. From this rhythm again is derived a heavier form in which the third quaver must be played with a certain amount of accent. Bach employs it for the representation of sorrowful pathos. Typical examples of it are the Siciliano of the fourth sonata for violin and clavier, and the violin accompaniment to the aria Erbarme dich in the St. Matthew Passion. Besides these three main forms of expression for the emotions signified by such words as peace and happiness, there's a fourth motif that externally resembles the solemnity rhythm. An example may be cited from the theme of Friede sei mit euch, peace be unto you, in the final aria of the cantata Halt im Gedächtnis Jesum Christ, number 67. The motif of terror. To express terror, Bach employs a series of reiterated quavers or semiquavers on the same note. He represents it, that is, as trembling or shuddering. The method in itself is rather primitive, but Bach achieves great effects with it, as we can see from the first movement of the cantata O Ewigkeit, du Donnerwort, number 60, through which there runs an unbroken series of shudders. Another example may be seen in the recitative with chorus, quote, O Schmerz, hier zittert das gequälte Herz, O grief, his tortured heart at last doth quail, end quote, in the St. Matthew Passion. The phrase, quote, Erschrecket, ihr verstockten Sünder, terror seize you, unrepentant sinners, end quote, in the cantata Wachet, Betet, number 70, is accompanied by whole chords in reiterated semiquavers. In the recitative, quote, Ach, soll nicht dieser große Tag, ach, shall not this great day, end quote, in the same cantata, Bach employs a trembling bass in order to depict the terror at the Last Judgment, and in a recitative in the cantata Schaut doch und seht, number 46, where reference is again made to the end of the world, the horror of the trembling bass is intensified by the addition of the chromatic motif. To paint the anxiety of the disciples after the death of Christ in the cantata Am Abend aber desselbigen Sabbats, number 42, Bach gives out in recitative after the prelude the following verse from St. John's Gospel, quote, Then the same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut where the disciples were assembled, for fear of the Jews, came Jesus and stood in the midst, end quote, with the trembling bass as sole accompaniment. The motifs of grief. To express grief, Bach employs the two motifs that have already appeared in the Orgelbewegung, a chromatic progression of 5 or 6 notes, typifying torturing grief, and a uniform sequence of notes in pairs that is like a series of sighs. The chromatic motif is frequently used to throw a particular word into high relief, for example in the final chorus of the Christmas cantata Christen etzet diesen Tag, number 63. At the words, quote, Aber niemals lass geschehen, dass uns Satan möge quälen, but never let Satan molest us, unquote. In a recitative in the cantata Gelobet seist du, Jesu Christ, number 91, the word Jammertal, valley of distress, is brought out in the same way. He often uses the chromatic progression as a basso ostinato. The first chorus of the cantata Jesu, der du meine Seele hast durch deinen bittern Tod, number 78, is founded on the following bass. The basso ostinato of the first chorus of the cantata on Hans Sachs' song Warum betrübst du dich, mein Herz, number 138, runs thus. A well-known example is the bass figure, repeated 13 times, of the Crucifixus in the B minor Mass. The sighing motif appears in two forms, one realistic, the other more idealistic. The former is meant to represent actual sighs. In the latter, the sighing is more spiritual, and the motif serves for the expression of noble lamentation. The words, quote, "ächzen und erbärmlich weinen," sighs and piteous weeping, end quote, in the cantata Meine Seufzer, meine Tränen, number 13, are rendered in music that suggests veritable sobbing. In the first chorus of Schauet doch und sehet, ob irgend ein Schmerz sei wie mein Schmerz. Behold and see if there be any sorrow like unto my sorrow. Number 46. The violas never cease their sighing. The words Seufzer, Tränen, Kummer, Not, sighs, tears, grief, distress, in the cantata Ich hatte viel Bekümmernis, number 21, are translated into music in this way. It cannot be denied that in many cases Bach has greatly intensified the sorrowful mood of the words, simply in order that his orchestra may have a pretext for lamentation. But never do we become satiated with his painting of clamorous grief, although he is always making use of the same motifs. This is due not only to the fine quality of his art, and to the perpetually new forms in which the motif appears, but also to the fact that the method of representation he adopts is wholly natural. It is this constant naturalness that makes Bach's musical language so consummate. The motif of noble grief is chiefly distinguished from the other by its closer intervals and smoother motion, the harmony thus transfiguring the grief. In a recitative in the Trauerrede, this grief motif appears in the following form. A typical example may be seen in the melodic line of the accompaniment to the great chorale chorus, quote, O Mensch, bewein dein Sünde groß, O man, bewail thy grievous sin, at the end of the first part of the St. Matthew Passion. That Bach was fully conscious of the meaning this motif had for him may be seen from the fact that for the opening chorus of the cantata, Wir müssen durch viel Trübsal in das Reich Gottes eingehen, number 146, he makes use of a clavier concerto andante that is based on the rhythm of two tied notes, simply adding the chorale parts to it. The movement is the well-known one, commencing thus. Here, the periodic interruption of the natural motion by wider intervals is very interesting. The same peculiarity characterizes a large number of Bach's themes of grief. It is seen in its most striking form in the accompaniment to the words, quote, Ich wünschte mir den Tod, wenn du, mein Jesus, mich nicht liebtest. I would desire to die if thou, my Jesus, didst not love me. End quote. In the cantata Selig ist der Mann, number 57. Further examples of Bach's way of depicting elevated grief may be seen in the opening of the cantata Ich will den Kreuzstab gerne tragen, number 56, and the Sinfonia of the cantata for the third Sunday after Easter, Weinen, Klagen, number 12. In the cantata Himmelskönig sei willkommen, number 182, with its wonderful passion atmosphere, the bass of the aria, quote, Jesu, lass durch Wohl und Weh mich auch mit dir ziehen. Jesus, let me follow thee through weal and woe, end quote, runs thus. The Morning Chorale, quote, Der Gott, der mir hat versprochen, the God who has promised me, end quote, in the cantata Meine Seufzer, meine Tränen, number 13, is also accompanied by the rhythm of noble grief. Bach employs it again whenever he wishes to express melancholy longing, as in the accompaniment to the first aria of the cantata, Ach, ich sehe, jetzt da ich zur Hochzeit gehe, number 162, and in the first aria of Liebster Jesu, mein Verlangen, number 32. The motive of noble grief, in an idealized form, depicts the longing for death. The death lullaby, quote, Letzte Stunde brich herein, mir die Augen zudrücken. Come, O last hour, and close my eyes, end quote, in the cantata Der Himmel lacht, die Erde jubiliert, number 31, begins thus. Motifs of joy. To express joy, Bach uses in the cantatas the same two motifs that he had employed in the chorales. The first consists of a succession of rapid notes, and expresses joy of a more direct and naive kind. The other is based on the rhythm, or on this, and more particularly typifies joyous agitation. An example of the first kind may be seen in the runs of the solo violin in the opening aria of the cantata Erfreute Zeit im Neuen Bunde, number 83. It is more especially the joyous mood of Christmas that Bach expresses in this way, as is shown by a number of choruses for that season. For instance, the cantata for the third day of Christmas, Ich freue mich in dir, number 133, the final chorale, Sei Lob und Preis, glory and praise, in the cantata Ihr Menschen rühmet Gottes Liebe, number 167, is accompanied in this way. The second of these two motifs is the one most frequently used in the cantatas, as it is in the chorales. It can assume manifold shapes, and so can express many varieties and shades of joy. In Bach's works, there are at least 200 motifs constructed upon this rhythm of joy, while it is scarcely met with in Handel and Beethoven. It is seen in its typical form in the violin solo of the Laudamus Te in the B minor Mass. The bass in the opening chorus of the German Magnificat, the cantata Meine Seele erhebt den Herrn, number 10, moves about in this way, vivace. The bass in the first chorus of the cantata, Herr Gott, dich loben wir, number 16, has the same motion. The main motif of the orchestral accompaniment to the first chorus of the cantata, Nun komm der Heiden Heiland, number 62, second composition, belongs to the same category. The chorus, quote, Jauchzet, ihr erfreuten Stimmen, rejoice, ye gladsome voices, unquote. In the cantata Gott, man lobt dich in der Stille, number 120, is also wholly dominated by the motif of joy. An example of the employment of this rhythm in the accompaniment of recitatives may be seen in Preise dein Glücke, gesegnetes Sachsen, BG 34, where Bach uses it to express in music the fidelity and love of the subjects who joyfully throw themselves at the feet of their sovereign. Bach is particularly fond of constructing bass figures out of this motif of joy. 3 typical examples may be cited from among many. The duet, quote, kennt die rechten Freudenstunden. He knows the hours of real joy, end quote, from the cantata Wer nur den lieben Gott lässt walten, number 93. The opening chorus of the cantata Lobe den Herrn, meine Seele, number 69, first composition. The aria, quote, Wohl mir, Jesus ist gefunden, nun bin ich nicht mehr betrübt. O joy, Jesus is found again, now am I no more sorrowful. End quote. In the cantata Mein liebster Jesu ist verloren, number 154. These motifs symbolize a joy that is still to some extent restrained. The more audacious the theme, the more unfettered is the joy. When Jesus took Peter away from his nets, bade him have no fear, and promised to make him a fisher of men, the disciples, judging from the motive with which Bach accompanies these words, must have been transported with joy. But even this motif seems temperate in comparison with the more exuberant ones. One of these is the bass of the aria, quote, Erholet euch, betrübte Stimmen, mein Jesus lässt sich wiedersehen, o Freude, der nichts gleichen kann. Recover yourselves, O afflicted voices, my Jesus returns, O joy without compare. End quote. In the cantata for the third Sunday after Easter, Ihr werdet weinen und heulen, number 103. The most extravagant of all the extravagant motifs of joy is seen in the bass figures in the aria, quote, Gelobet sei der Herr, praised be the Lord, end quote. In the chorale cantata Gelobet sei der Herr, mein Gott, number 129. Ecstatic joy is not expressed by a definite motif, but by dreamy arabesques in a solo instrument. An example may be seen in the violin accompaniment to the duet, quote, Wann kommst du, mein Heil? When comest thou, my salvation? End quote. In Wachet auf, number 140. In the first aria of the cantata Weichet nur, betrübte Schatten, the oboe sings a spring song of extraordinary loveliness, while the arpeggios in the strings depict the mists floating upward. Rapturous joy is expressed again in the accompaniment to the aria, quote, Ich will doch wohl Rosen brechen, wenn mich gleich die Dornen stechen. Yet I will gather roses, even though the thorns prick me, in the cantata Wahrlich, ich sage euch, number 86. Other examples may be seen in the violin solo in the aria, quote, Ich traue seiner Güte, I trust in his goodness, end quote. In the chorale cantata In allen meinen Taten, number 97. The flute solo in the soprano aria in the chorale cantata Was Gott tut, das ist wohlgetan, number 100. The oboe soli in the two cantatas that express the longing for death, Liebster Jesu, mein Verlangen, number 32, and Ich habe genug, number 82. In the aria, quote, Die Seele ruht in Jesu Händen, the soul is at rest in Jesus' hands, end quote. In the cantata Herr Jesu Christ, wahrer Mensch und Gott, number 127, the oboe weaves celestial garlands of sound round the tolling of the funeral bells. End of chapter 23, part 3, read by Sandra, 2021.